So I'm going to kind of cover some other issues, some elephants in the room that haven't been talked about too much. You know, really what we want to talk about is what recent and pending things are going to affect pipeline safety. So I'm going to go through some of those from kind of the public pipeline safety perspective, and I'm going to probably skip some of my slides to make sure we have some time for questions at the end. The Pipeline Safety Trust looks at you know, our priorities for the next year, so I just want to hit those briefly and talk about them a little more, and we're having a board meeting here all day Saturday to kind of see if the ones I put here on the screen jive with my board at all, and I'll find that out Saturday. But we really want to continue to push on the current and pending rules. You've heard a lot about that this morning already. We're really into greater transparency, and I'm going to talk about that some more. We really need to find better ways to educate and involve the public. You know, we have filled a void for years now of being the public, but there's a lot of other public out there, and they don't all agree with us for that matter. We really, and I'm not going to talk any more about this other than to mention it here, we think there needs to be some minimal regulations and standards on rural gathering lines. And you've heard that mentioned in the rule that's moving forward, that there's some effort in that way, but really in rural gathering lines, they're still completely and totally unregulated, even though many of them are exactly the same as transmission pipelines. Some of the states are starting to step in and fill that void. Pete Chase from Ohio moved forward and regulated rural gathering lines. So if people want to know how to do it, Pete would be a great person to chat with. We're going to be talking about rethinking this conference. We've been doing this for 11 years now, and we want to know why to do that and how we can move to get to zero incidents over the barrier of the cost benefit. I'm going to not talk at all about the pending and final rules because you've heard about all those a couple of times now. I just want to talk a little bit about one of the things that I think the Pipeline Safety Trust does good, and that's pushing for greater transparency, indicators, and data analysis. And we kind of have three efforts going forward, main efforts that we'll be focusing on in the next year. The first one is we've put our toe in the water up in Canada. I've learned to say A and process and eat poutine, and it's all been quite enjoyable. And it came about in a weird sort of way a little over a year ago. The Canadian Energy Pipeline Association, which is the big industry association in Canada, approached us and said, we'd love for you to bring to the table an idea of what public transparency and public pipeline safety indicators would look at. We aren't going to give you any ideas. Start from a blank slate. Don't worry about what we actually collect, but tell us what you would like to know as far as indicators that would give the public some idea of pipeline safety. And that caused a great deal of head scratching within the Pipeline Safety Trust, of a partnership with the industry like that. But we did that, and then this year from January through March, we spent a lot of time looking at the way they collect data in Canada, learning how to read things in cubic meters and kilometers. That was an adventure myself, growing up in the dumb American educational system. And in learning the Canadian system a little bit, they are very different than we are in the US, where we have kind of PHMSA, the mothership, overseeing the states. In Canada, you have the NEB overseeing some of the interprovincial pipelines that cross boundaries, but a lot of the provinces regulate way more pipelines, and they're really separate. They don't have the same setup, so they all collect things differently. And we came out with a proposal then of what we thought pipeline safety indicators in Canada would look like, and we held a workshop up there in Calgary in May and walked through that with a room full of industry folks, regulators from most of the provinces, the NEB, and a number of the public that we brought in from across Canada to be part of that discussion. And I think it was good, and it kind of kicked that thing off, and the next step of that happens next week. I get to go to Calgary on the 27th, so I'm going to go from beignets to poutine within a week. It's an amazing life I live, and because there's a meeting in the NEB office next week on the 27th to talk about, with the Canadian Standard Association, the idea of creating a consensus-based standard on pipeline safety indicators, which is a really different way to go about that. We also have been working with PHMSA for, I don't even know how long it's been now, 3 years, 3 years. PHMSA's been, coming up with pipeline safety indicators of their own, and they've put a lot of stuff up on their website, which, their website's got so big that it's sometimes hard to find it now. But they have lots of new indicators up, and I think a lot of people don't even understand what's available. Like, did you know that now you can compare the safety outcomes of individual companies? So lots of information, especially on the natural gas side. Some of the liquid indicators haven't gone up yet because there's still some refining of those to go on. But I think the next step is, how do we describe these so people actually know them? The problem with a lot of these indicator efforts are they're run by engineers, and engineers look at data and look at tables, and they come, that talks to them. The public looks at that, and could a public know, looking at this, that CenterPoint Energy Minnesota Gas has twice as many incidents per mile as Virginia Natural Gas? Does that make them twice as unsafe? Probably not. So somehow, other than engineers, need to tell the story of what the data really means, and I think that's the next step in this effort. And one of the things we do every year is we review all 50 states for transparency by looking at their website. And this is the 2016 Transparency Review. I think it's the first time we've actually showed this publicly. It's in the newsletter in your packet. And we're happy to see that there's 3 states that got a perfect score this year. And Washington bribed us to do it in reverse alphabetical order, so they were at the top of the list. But they tied with Nevada and Arkansas, and Washington and Arkansas has been dueling for top for a few years now. The real latecomer in this that we're really pleased is Nevada. And if you look at, this just kind of shows states what their score is, and in green is, whether they've moved up in points, and in red is whether they're going the wrong direction. And as you can see, Nevada really moved from middle of the pack right up to the top this year. So that was exciting to see. In a number of other states like Texas, New Hampshire, Illinois, South Carolina also are moving up. So that's good, and that will continue to do that. And we're pleased to see some states taking it seriously and trying to provide more information. We played with the idea of doing this for individual companies too, but that would be a huge undertaking. One of the things we really want to start thinking about more is how to better involve and educate the public about pipeline safety. Because for the first time, there's a lot of public that are thinking about pipelines, and I'll mention that a little bit more lately. But so there's an audience out there. It used to be we didn't have many people to talk to because there wasn't many public paying attention, and now there's a lot of people paying attention to pipelines, some for kind of maybe not so completely connected reasons. So we really need to find public that wants to be involved and vet those public and bring them in and somehow keep them involved, and then give them the tools to help them participate more on into the future. And our most recent one is a guide to the rulemaking process, which is in your packet. We also think it's important to bring the public together where they meet each other. Some of the public went out for beignets last night. One of the conferences a few years ago, the picture on the bottom, the industry helped us put on a tour the day before the conference of some of the facilities here in Louisiana. That was really valuable. And then we do a lot of outreach around the country where we bring people together. Up on the top right there is we took a bunch of people to San Bruno, and that's the mayor of San Bruno telling those folks what happened and what they learned out of that. And we do lots of public workshops around Salt Lake City, Fort Worth, around the country, trying to bring people together, meet each other, and move forward. One of the big barriers to more public participation is funding. PHMSA holds a lot of workshops, the industry holds meetings and conferences, other people do, but it's really difficult, as I mentioned earlier on, for the public to attend those, to take time out of their job and then spend $1,000 to travel to somewhere and stay in a hotel. So we've really tried to up our game as far as fundraising to create a pot of money for that, and I think it's a huge opportunity for regulators. That's my only campaign joke I'm going to try to do the whole time. The rest of the campaign is just a joke. So, a huge opportunity for regulators and the industry, I think, to demonstrate a commitment in trust in public involvement to step up and help us, fund some public participation in some of these efforts. I mentioned we're going to rethink the conference. That's one of the topics on our agenda Saturday. We've been doing this for 11 years now, and we're wondering, what's the point of it? Is it still working well? You'll get a survey after the conference, so we really want to hear from you. We're going to talk about stronger partnerships with people. Should we be partnering with regulators more and giving them more of a say in the way the conference runs? Or should we be bringing in more public and dealing with differing views more than we do now? I'm going to skip these and to make sure we have time for some questions here at the end. The other three things I want to talk about are really the elephants in the room, because we've talked today, and you're going to hear the rest of it, some fairly blinders on talking about pipeline safety. How do we deal with leak detection and valves and integrity management and SMS? But what the public is talking about are other things. They're talking about climate change, and that's why we have so many people interested in pipeline safety all of a sudden. They're talking about eminent domain and the way they're treated, and tribal rights and consultation has become a huge issue. And we've often wondered, well, how does climate change, how is this really a pipeline safety issue? Well, as more and more people are taking climate change real seriously, and as the scientists keep telling us we need to take it more and more seriously, people are getting very active in that. Just last week or the week before, we had people climbing over fences and shut down 5 major pipelines by turning valves. There's a picture of somebody cutting the chain on a valve before they shut the pipeline down. Very dangerous thing to do. We condemn that, continue to condemn that. It's a silly activity, although we understand the passion that's leading people to do that, because the government has not addressed the whole issue very well at all. So certainly we all need to work together to try to figure out a way to start dealing with the passion around climate change, because have you tried to site a new big pipeline lately? Eminent domain's the same way. There's a big national effort now to remove the ability to use eminent domain for pipelines, and a lot of that's being driven by pipelines that are primarily being used to export stuff out of the country. What's the value to people living in the U.S. if the whole point of it is to ship it to China or somewhere? So we need to get our handle on eminent domain. We need to know how to treat people better when we're moving on and taking their property, or it's going to continue to undermine the trust in pipeline safety. And finally, I think the newest thing, and certainly if you look at Standing Rock today, it's one of the biggest gatherings of tribes, I think, in the last 150 years. And tribes both in the U.S. and in Canada, and there's different terminology depending which country you're in, really are demanding that they are dealt with early on, and that they're consulted and that the involvement goes on. And I don't think anybody has a good sense of that. We're really pleased to have 8 or 9 tribal members here today, so maybe they can ask them questions and help us in that discussion. But that's certainly becoming a barrier to putting new pipelines in the ground, and operations of pipelines that are already in the ground. I think the good news of all of this is that I'm a eternal optimist, an optimistic cynic, I don't know which it is. But I really believe that the oil and gas industry has the resources, the technical ability, and the organization to fix all these things more rapidly than anybody else. They've got the money, you've got the expertise, you can fix most all of this stuff way quicker than the government. I have a government hat I wear, and I know how slow the government works. And the public has very little opportunities other than just to complain. So the industry can fix this if they want. The question is, do you want to? I mean, because we keep seeing the industry dragging their feet, complaining about costs, not justifying the investments, talking out of both sides of your mouth sometimes because you're trying to maximize the short-term profits to push stuff offshore. So, if we want to fix a lot of these things, I think it's up to the industry to start changing their tune a little bit.